All right, today we're going to be asking ourselves, how do we multiply rational numbers? And we have a few rules that you can use to help you get through multiplying rational numbers. And we have a plus mountain over here as a little trick to make sure you make the right choice when you're multiplying positive and negative numbers. So the first thing we need to know is if the signs are the same, the answer is always positive. If the signs are the same, the answer is always positive. That means if I'm multiplying a positive times a positive, my answer is going to be positive. And if I'm multiplying a negative times a negative, the answer is going to be positive. If the signs are different, the answer is always negative. That means if I'm multiplying a positive times a negative, my answer is always going to be negative. And if I'm multiplying a negative times a positive, my answer is always going to be negative. Okay, so how the plus mountain works is you draw a triangle, you put a plus on the top and two negative signs on the bottom. So if I cover up a positive and a negative because I'm multiplying a positive and a negative, my answer would be negative. If I multiply a negative times a negative, my answer is going to be positive. If I multiply a positive times a negative, my answer is going to be negative. So same signs positive, different signs negative. That's when you're multiplying only two numbers. Now when you're multiplying fractions, this applies to fractions, you always multiply straight across. Numerator times numerator, numerator times numerator, and denominator times denominator. So if you were to look at two fractions, it would be, let's say I have x over b times y over c. It would be xy over bc. You just multiply straight across and write your answer. And then of course at the end you always simplify your answer. So for instance, if my answer was 5/10, I would divide by 5, divide by 5, and my answer would be 1/2. You would always want to have your answer in simplest form. Okay, let's try an example. So Gina hiked down a canyon and stopped each time she descended 1/2 mile to rest. She hiked a total of 4 sections. What is her overall change in elevation? The first step is to use a negative number to represent the change in elevation because she descended. To descend means to go down, so you want to use a negative number to represent the negative 1/2 miles that she went down. And she's going to do that 4 times. So we're going to multiply 4 times negative 1/2. Another thing you need to know is if you have a whole number, always turn it into a fraction. So if you already have one fraction, if you know you're going to be multiplying fractions, it doesn't apply if you have two whole numbers, but if one of your numbers is a whole number and one of them is a fraction, you want to change that whole number into a fraction by placing it over 1. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. I have 4 here as my whole number. I want to put 4 over 1, and I'm going to multiply that by negative 1/2. Some of you might not know that when you see a number directly next to parentheses, the imaginary, I shouldn't say that, the invisible operation that's there is a multiplication sign. So anytime you see two numbers written like that with no operation between them, it's a multiplication sign that goes there. So I have 4 over 1 times negative 1/2. Well, I know that I multiply straight across. Sorry, that's my phone. Negative 4. And then I have 1 times 2. And 1 times 2 is 2. Well, then I need to simplify. I always simplify my answer. And since they're both even, I can divide by 2. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Over 2 divided by 2 is 1, which simplifies to negative 2 and it's miles, so -2 miles. That's how far she descended. Let's take a look at that on the number line to help clarify for some of you that may be a little confused by it. I start here with 0, that's going to be a 1 and a 2 and a 3, and then I have a -1, -2, -3. Okay, so what I want to do is go -1/2 4 times. So I start at 0, and these are my little half marks. So there's 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, 4/2. That was 4 times, and I should end up at -2. I did -1/2 4 times, and I end up with -2, or -2 miles. Okay, I want you to press pause and try these 2 questions on your own. Go ahead and press pause and try and show your work down here on your own. Okay, let's take a look at them. 4/6 times -3/2. Well, I first know that since I'm multiplying a positive times a negative, my signs are different, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And I multiply across. What's 4 times 3? 12. What's 6 times 5? 30. You're going to divide both of them by 6. You could have divided by 2, and that would have been perfectly fine. It would have just taken you a little longer to get there. So divide by 6, I would get 2, and divide by 6, I get 5. So my answer is 2/5. All right, for the next one, these are just 2 decimal and a whole number I'm multiplying. So 3/5 times 2. And remember, when you're multiplying decimals, you multiply straight down. So 2 times 5 is 10, carry your 1. 2 times 3 is 6, carry your 1 is 7. And since I have 1 decimal here and 0 decimal places there, I'm going to move it once, and my answer equals 7. Since I'm multiplying a positive times a negative, my answer should be -7. All right, very good. Let's look at the second example. Well, in this example, we have -2 times -3.5. Well, I just multiplied 3.5 times 2, and I know that I got 7. And this time I have a negative times a negative, and my signs are the same, so my answer should just be 7. Okay, I want you to again press pause. Press pause on the video now, and try numbers 1 and 2 and see if you get them right. All right, number 1, let's multiply these decimals again. 1.25 times 3. I have a negative times a negative, so I know my answer is going to be positive. 5 times 3 is 15, carry your 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, as a review, you have 2 decimal places here, 0 decimal places here, so I have to move it 2, and you always move it from right to left, and you stick the decimal there, so my answer is a positive 3 75/100ths. All right, number 2, we have a whole number times a fraction, so we need to first change that whole number into a fraction by placing it over 1. 5/1 times 2/6. I can multiply straight across. 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 6 is 6. Positive times a positive, I'm still going to get a positive. Then I need to simplify this. How many times does 6 go into 10? Once, with 4/6 left over. That simplifies to divide by 2. 1 2/3. You could have simplified the 10/6 by dividing by 2 and gotten 5/3, and that would have also made 1 2/3. Either way you do it is fine, just as long as you get the simplified answer as 1 2/3.